Woodside a little over 4 years ago to help with the transition of Woodside into new energy. Where did I start, though, is probably a little bit of a background that will be useful, and I'll give you a little bit of that background here in a second. First off, though, I'd like to, we have several of the Woodside team here in the room, and I'd like for them to stand for a second, putting you guys on the spot real quick. And why is this important? Today and tomorrow is really about the conversations, not here in the front of the room, but the ones that are happening actually in between people. And I just want you to seek out my colleagues here as well and help form those connections that are incredibly important for us and important for projects and such to move forward as well. So thank you, guys. Thanks. So a little bit about myself. I'm an engineer by background. That's what I was trained in. I spent the most of my life, 24 years of that, actually working in aerospace. Worked for a small startup in the US called NASA for those years. And the big challenge we had with facing human spaceflight, because that's the area I worked in, was how to sustain human presence off the Earth by minimizing the resources we had to take from Earth. So it sounds familiar to the charge that we're after today. And it was all about that. It was about how to foster the reuse of water, how to recycle the CO2 that we exhale, how to create food and sustainability and nutrients on long trips in human spaceflight. So these are some of the things that I think about when we think about how to design projects for the future and how do we actually think about energy transition as well. Hopefully these are advancing. If you can move one slide. One thing, just the lawyers in the room, don't trade on information I say. I'm an engineer, not a finance person, so that's probably a good thing to keep in mind. A little bit about Woodside. We think about things globally, but then act and do a lot of things locally. One of the things you see with our global footprint, you also see a strong connection to the countries we work with, the neighboring communities we're in, and that's just a big focus of what we want, but also we also bring the global reach of the capabilities and the finance to bring that. I think I heard Michael's talk at the beginning about how do we come together as public, private sector, and as community, and actually manage that in a way to get an outcome. And that's really important. One of the things I'll talk about a little bit is our history. So Woodside's history is primarily with our first customer and country, and that being Japan. The Northwest Shelf Project, in its history, was one of the largest projects in the Southern Hemisphere ever intended to bring to market. There's a whole host of operators. So there's operator partnerships that brought together global players and little old Woodside at the time as the operator, which was the local piece of that operator joint venture. But then importantly, it was the customers, and the customers on the Japan side that were really in need for that energy and the energy for their own lifestyle that they needed to sustain. And then there's the long history and tradition of working together. So it wasn't just the beginning, but it was the decades of work together. And today we've delivered actually not just 5,000, but over 6,000 cargoes. We've actually never missed a cargo delivery in our history as a company. So it's that reliability of our partnership together. Then you fast forward, more large-scale project execution that we've had. We've actually now changed that Karratha gas plant to a facility that can process not just our gas, but any gas in the region. And now our latest growth with the merger with BHP Petroleum Worldwide, which gave us even more presence globally to execute what we want to go after, which is energy and energy to deliver for all of our customers and partners. A little bit about how we think about new energy. You can't talk about new energy without talking about who wants it and why do they need it. So I'll focus in on 4 areas here, one of them being transport, the first one up there, heavy-duty transport. So hydrogen has a role in the transportation sector, be it heavy vehicles, passenger vehicles even, or even large-scale shipping. And we see that as a market that is ripe for disruption, for decarbonization first, because it has the chance to be basically in competitive parity of cost of, say, the replacement of diesel. The other big segment is in power generation. So you saw some of the charts earlier about Germany's challenge and the amount of power it consumes. How do we decarbonize that power sector? By emissions, power is one of the biggest emitters in the world, and decarbonization of the power. So how do we deliver energy that's already decarbonized for the power sector? Shipping and marine, we all rely on the international shipping markets, and how do we decarbonize that? Globally is also a big ambition of the shipping industry and of global energy suppliers. And then there's the entire industrial chain, the thousands of products that are petrochemical based today, but how do we remove the petrochemical piece of that and supply lower carbon solutions for those? I'll touch a little bit about carbon management. Probably not as relevant for Southern Green Hydrogen here, because you guys are blessed with the hydropower that you have and the wind energy that's here. But carbon management for other aspects of development is kind of essential for all energy transition. We look at carbon management in 3 pillars. Offsets, so how do you generate biological absorption offsets in the regions of where the pollution is coming from? So we have a very strong offsets portfolio, say in Western Australia where our base operations are. The other one is carbon capture sequestration, where we take the CO2 that actually comes from the products and put it back in the ground, actually from the same place it came out of. And the thing that held it back millions of years for why the petrochemicals are there, now will hold it back millions of years for CO2 storage as well. Those play a role. The part that gets me really excited as the engineer is the carbon to products piece of this. And this is, there's a lot of carbon in everything we do. So how do we use CO2 along with green hydrogen and such to make the products we all need? And how do we go about making those in a different way? So one of the initiatives we have at Woodside is carbon to products, which is take CO2, combine it with green hydrogen, and make the products we have. You'll hear from one of my colleagues here in a minute, but that leads to how do you circularize carbon and use that carbon in a productive way, but also manage it as well. I'll give it a little bit, since this is about innovation. I wanted to talk through probably 3 of these examples up here. I'll spend a little bit more time on a few of them. And then I'll leave some time for Jitendra also to speak as well. One of them on the left-hand side, concentrated solar thermal. This is probably a technology that you guys have not been exposed to in New Zealand, especially in Southland, I would imagine as well. But a lot of the world today doesn't have the firming power sources. So I'll talk about this, because of New Zealand's advantage and Southland's advantage, the role of firming power in the form of hydroelectric is essential. You talk about renewables and renewable penetration, whether you have wind or solar, those can get you, in the best cases in the world, to maybe 70–80% coverage of renewables in the best places for renewables in the world. So how do you solve the other 20% problem? So the other 20% challenge is solved here in New Zealand with hydro, but that's not everywhere, and it can't be everywhere. So one of the other technologies we've been looking at is when you store energy, hydro is one of the lowest cost ways to do it. The second lowest cost way to do it is thermal energy, so store it as heat. So what concentrated solar thermal is, and the technology that we're advancing with a company called Heliogen, is a system of mirrors. Those mirrors reflect and create superheated heat, air, and the air is then transferred to particles, and that particle becomes a very hot box of rocks, basically. It's sintered bauxite, actually. And that box of rocks then provide a heat source to run 24, 48 hours. And then you can run, steam turbines and such off of it, or even more advanced technology called supercritical CO2. So we're building a plant right now to bring this technology to market jointly with Heliogen. We're building it in the Mojave Desert in California. And what it will do is solve some of the technology problems that these types of systems have had in the past. Better mirror pointing is one of them, one of the breakthroughs they have there. The particle actually movements and heat exchangers will advance, and supercritical CO2 systems for the actual power gen that sits on the back side of it as well. What this allows for at the end of the day is a firming power solution where it's sunny. So a lot of places in the world where you can use solar power, you don't have hydro power to firm that. They're kind of usually in opposition of each other. So this allows us a firming power solution in those types of areas in the world, but also it's a role for companies like ours to help bring that technology to market. We're quite excited about that. Another area, and I'll just briefly touch on it because Jitendra may go into more detail, is in carbon to products. So we have a series of demonstrations or pilots that we're advancing on taking CO2 and converting it into other items. When Jitendra and I both actually worked together at NASA, one of the areas that we were keenly interested in is how to create vitamins for long-term health of astronauts in space. You see a lot of talks about how do you grow food in space. There's even movies about it. The potatoes. By the way, potatoes aren't a very good energy source, but that's another story for that. But how do you create the amino acids that are our vitamins? So it's one thing to have calories and eat food and be full, but it's another thing to have the vitamin value. And it turns out over 3 years, if you store food, your vitamin value goes to almost nothing. So one of the big pushes we had was, how do we take CO2 and create amino acids, the building blocks of vitamins in space? And we actually demonstrated that on the International Space Station. But how do you take an International Space Station experiment and now do it at scale here on Earth? And one of the companies we've invested in is a company called String Bio in Bangalore, India. And they have a very unique bacteria that they use that basically eats hydrocarbons, and its waste product is, in this case, protein. And that protein then is just like any other protein and can be used for animal feed or even human feed. They're actually using it for animal feed already in India, and they're actually in the pathway right now of FDA testing and such in the United States as well. Very intriguing technology, but it's one of several platforms that allow you to do that kind of conversion. The next one is about ethanol, so ethanol from waste. So ethanol today is mainly produced from agriculture, grains, and most of the ethanol production in the world is actually done in China, besides the US, which is done from corn. Ethanol is a substitute for diesel or fuel blending. In the US, you have the fuel blending standard of 10% and all the way up to 85% ethanol in cars. But all that's done from grain and food source, actually. So you have this challenge then of agriculture and energy being at opposition of each other. And we just fundamentally believe that we shouldn't be mixing food streams and energy streams. And so we're looking at how to create ethanol, say, from industrial gas wastes. So you take the industrial gas waste that would have gone into the atmosphere, you add hydrogen and such to it if that's needed. In this case, the demonstration we're doing, we're actually using landfill gas, so it already has a methane source in it. And you use that, you produce ethanol from it. So there's a few technologies that are sitting behind this. One of them is related to plasma pyrolysis, which is, just for the folks in the room, it is a high temperature heat source, 3,000 degrees or more, that basically destroys the methane and makes it come apart. So you have your carbon and hydrogen molecules by themselves, and then they reform as it cools into what they call syngas, which is a mixture of hydrogen and carbon monoxide. Then the back end of this plant actually has a biology source again. In this case, it's a different type of bacteria from another company called Lanzatech. And then that bacteria actually processes that syngas and produces ethanol as its waste stream. So think about, I heard the distillery being built. And there's probably a few breweries around, I would imagine, as well. This is like a large brewery, but instead of producing alcohol to drink, it's alcohol to power a car. And at the end of the day, if you looked at the emissions that would come from normal diesel use and emissions from an industrial plant, you're getting rid of the diesel use, using the industrial waste to produce the fuel, and so you get a 50% reduction of that overall emissions and CO2 at that time. It's a stepping stone towards lower carbon and decarbonization. We have a whole topic, and there'll be a session tomorrow on Southern Green Hydrogen. We're really excited to bring world-class technology and capabilities and partners together here locally and globally to execute a large-scale ammonia project for export. Going back to those customers, going back to the power partners here and the community partners we have here. So I'll leave most of the conversation about that to the partnership folks tomorrow. I'll just leave you on a couple notes before I turn it over to Jitender. I heard a lot of comments earlier about the energy transition and its challenges, but I would actually just look at a lot of the opportunities. The opportunities to be really innovative on the way we decarbonize. The new business pathways will all form together for that. The new ways of working with community from the start, from the right way. And we'll all be able to bring that. I think, Mike, your kind of 3 partnerships that you had when you introduced it, I love your history lesson there of working together, public, private, and community working together. And I think that's all. Collaboration is going to be key to this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jitendra for a little bit. So Jitendra Joshi, I'll give you an introduction to him. So Jitendra Joshi, him and I have worked together for over 15 years now. And he was one of my lead scientists at NASA when I was there. And when I made my refugee trip to Australia to stay, he phoned me up and said, if it's nice there, I'll come with you. And I phoned him up not very long after I got there, and I said, it is nice. And there's a different way to live than in Washington, D.C. No offense to folks that are from Washington. I hope there's none in the room. I don't think there are, or online. But I found, so we came together to kind of work on the technologies that we're doing for space, but now for the benefit of Earth. And we're both very mission-driven people from that perspective. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jitendra. I think we got him coming in. Actually, Jitendra's coming in live from California, I believe, where he's actually at a conference speaking on synthetic biology and this biology technology as well. So with that, Jitendra, I think we have you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for having me remotely, Jason. I think you covered everything in the next slide too, but let me just start off by saying I heard energy transition. No transition happens without attitude transition. Brother Terry, your ancestors gave the world an attitude transition over 200 years ago. I refer to Te Wahiti Orongomai and Tohu Kukai, who actually gave the first principles of civil disobedience and nonviolence. 40 years later, Mahatma Gandhi, after that Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., all followed their steed. Today we talk of transition. First should come attitude transition. In your Maori culture, I don't know all the Tikangas, but permaculture is something you have practiced for ages. You say what you put in must be replaced. And that is what we are trying to do. We're trying to take out the carbon that we put out. We're trying to circularize our economy with some of the cultural values peoples from around the world have lived. Jason talked about ethanol, protein, carotenoids, vitamins. When you take the CO2 and the greenhouse gases and you convert them into what is required products, you actually reduce the ecological footprint by not digging for more non-renewables, not wasting more agricultural land. I also, along with our new energy solutions and Woodsides, we believe commerce without camaraderie will lead to chaos and cantankerous relationships. So when Woodside comes here, when I come here to work with you guys, we come with camaraderie and friendship in order to enable commerce, in order to enable that circular economy through hydrogen, CO2, and methane, and these greenhouse gases into products so that we don't rely on non-renewables and reduce our ecological footprint. That's all I had to say. Thank you for everything your culture has taught us. Technology, we all can live together.
Thanks, Jitendra. So I think we have, we purposely left some time for some questions now. I think we've caught up a little bit of the schedule for you guys a little bit as well. But we do want to have some time for some questions that you guys may have on this in general, random space questions, I guess, as well. But yeah, very open to anything you guys would be curious about. A quiet morning. I don't know if we're running mics, but the microphone people, go for it, Sophie. Go. I'll repeat the question. I can't hear you. Oh, there's Sophie.
Hi, just wondering what your efficiency rates were for carbon capture and storage that you're aiming for.
So efficiency rates for carbon capture and storage back into Are you talking about from gases that come from, say, methane used for hydrogen production?
Yes.
Yeah, so our facilities that utilize gas as part of the production method, the current technologies that you have out there are steam methane reforming and autothermal reforming. Both of those technology choices will give you greater than 85% carbon capture from that. And what we're aiming is actually above 85% at 92 and higher percent from our gas projects. So we capture over 92% of the CO2 that comes off the methane. And then that 92% is what's injected in. The other 8% then, it gets a little more challenging to manage. Some of that is actually just losses in the system that you can't actually fully recover, and you look at offsets for those. But there are also some technology choices to get from that 92%, even as high as 98% carbon capture off of gas-based production. What we're doing here has nothing to do with that, so it's all water splitting and obviously renewable energy. But there's actually a role for both when the carbon is managed as well. So good question. In the back there, gentlemen. I think a mic's coming behind you.
Do you have a handle on the energy return on energy invested for green hydrogen?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Do you have a handle on the energy return on energy invested for green hydrogen?
I'm not catching the first part of your question. I apologize.
Do you have a handle on
Yeah.
the energy return on energy invested
Oh,
for
energy.
green hydrogen?
Okay, so the energy return. You're talking about energy in to the energy out, is your question, I'm believing. So the most efficient thing to do in using a renewable electricity is to use it as electricity. So first most, if you can electrify something direct, you electrify it. So that'll get you your best efficiency levels. But then when you produce the hydrogen, it takes about, in order to split water, it takes about, call it 50 to around 50 kilowatts per kilogram of hydrogen to produce. So you need 50 kilowatts of energy to produce 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And then the energy round trip use of that, when you take it to your customer, you may put that in the form of ammonia, you may even liquefy it, and then move it to your customer. You'll have some boil-off losses or losses along the way. When you're dealing with liquids, ammonia, you won't have that. And then depends on how your customer uses it at the other end. If they're combusting ammonia, like a lot of those in the Japan markets want to do, then you have a combustion product that they're just burning it alongside and as a replacement for coal combustion. If you get pure hydrogen back into, say, a transport vehicle, and you're using fuel cells, you end up with about 60% efficiency on the use of that hydrogen. So, and if you combust hydrogen, you're in the 30-some% efficiencies. So your question is actually kind of complex. It depends on production use, your transport, and then the end use of that technology. But the biggest challenge we have in the world is how do you move energy from abundant locations where you can get abundant renewable energy to those that have no choice, where there's too much, not enough land, not enough natural resource for them to have it. So we have a couple of choices, really long cables, or converting it to an energy product from electrons to molecules and then shipping around the world as we do today with fossil fuels. But so that's the big challenge is we can't actually run cables to everything. So part of the world's energy sector needs to move in the form of molecules to get it from energy-rich to energy-poor areas. And then you do suffer the energy losses along the way with that. So, sorry, a long answer for your question, but probably a good one for everybody to kind of ponder as well. Sophie's coming to you.
Kia ora, Jason. Ko Jana Davis tōku ingoa, he kaimahi mātou mai te rōpū te tapu o tāne. I've got a couple of questions for you. Question one, how long does it take to build an ammonia plant?
Yeah, so there's the construction phase of things, which is about 3 years. But then you have the actual planning ahead of time for whatever it is required on permitting and actually figuring out sites and those types of things. And so you have that, and then upfront engineering. So roughly we think about 5 years as the time cycle for projects, depending on where you start that upfront part. But we typically around 2 to 3 years in that upfront, and about 3 years, 2 to 3 years for construction.
Complete. Question 2, how many times have you been to New Zealand?
Me, I have not been at all. This is my very first time to New
No,
Zealand.
my height, mate.
No, but my team is becoming quite frequent visitors, and several of my team actually are originally from New Zealand, getting back home. From
We don't have NASA here. We've got Rocket Lab.
No, Rocket Lab, yeah, with Peter's company up there is great, but they're in the north, not down here.
So I work for a charity that's owned by the 4 Runanga down here, and one of our big goals is training and pathways. So how does a small charity like mine, who's environmentally focused, how do we link into this bigger picture to help provide better training and pathways that link into this energy market, which ultimately is looking for a green focus? You know, we're not Perth, we don't have those big training facilities down here, but you know, that's something certainly worth looking at. So how do we, I guess that's the first stage, is training and pathways and transitioning our workforce. What's your advice on getting started down here?
I think about it as 2 ways. There's training and bringing everybody up together on the use and what decarbonization opportunities will bring to not just one project, but the entire decarbonization efforts. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done on explaining and providing the education opportunities for whether it's renewable power generation, the use of hydrogen, the use of ammonia substitution into green ammonia. There's that piece of it. And then there's actually when you get into production facilities, how do we train operators of those facilities, maintainers of those facilities, whether it's the ammonia kind of side of things or the electrolysis units. These units need to be replaced on a regular basis. They need to be maintained. So there's the maintenance cycle, and you don't send electrolysis units back to Germany. Sorry, we don't send them back. You repair them actually here locally. So there'll be a whole host of activities we'll have to do related to how to get those operator and trainees and traineeship positions here for any kind of facility, especially like Southern Green Hydrogen, and build that training capability here, not just at the start, but actually as an ongoing activity. If you look to our Karratha gas plant, 1,600 kilometers north of Perth, very small community. We work with a local technical college, the TAFE series of education in Western Australia, but actually we run our own training facility actually right on site as well. And our actual operations in Karratha are actually all local led operations. And we have near 60% Indigenous involvement with all of our training programs. And that's our hiring pool for all of our operations as well. So yeah, but there's 2 facets to this. There's a facility kind of training piece, and then there's actually the global economy of decarbonization. I think that we'll both need a lot of help and work with, and we're here to help both of those.
It'd be interesting to know how many people from Murray-Hicko are working for Woodside in Western Australia right now.
That would be interesting to know. Yeah, the statistics of how many from...
There is opportunities for them to come home. And I've spent a lot of time over in Western Australia growing up. Actually worked for Woodside at one point.
Okay.
Thanks.
No, so for the benefit of those online, I would be curious to how many folks from New Zealand and actually local community here actually may even work for Woodside. Yeah, we'll have to look that up, actually. We do keep a lot of stats on folks.
Just a
help
point
bring them
though,
home.
like this sort of corridor here around TAFE is basically the Te Pukenga Polytech of WA. And you know, what courses there can we be duplicating back here? How quickly can we get that knowledge back here? And placements around training and pathways, but ultimately we want to be bringing our people home. So yeah, that knowledge on who you've already got internally is massive, and to be able to feed that information back to the Runanga is big too. And you know, those opportunities created on the ground. How do we get the training going? But ultimately, how do we start bringing that success back to Murihiku?
No, thank you, and we'll definitely figure out who from our company for sure is already on the books. So, okay, yeah. So with that, I think thank you guys for first welcoming me here, my very first trip, and also the hospitality that you've shown us, and hopefully we show that back to you guys as well. Again, reach out to the Woodside colleagues we have, and we're looking forward to talking today and tomorrow with everyone, and into the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions. It's my great pleasure now to invite to the podium General Manager Dean Ford from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, who will be your chair for the next session. Thank you.